analog clock. So for our learning objectives, we will learn to find the hour and minute hand on an analog clock and understand what they show. We'll practice telling time to the nearest 5 minutes on analog clocks, and we will write down the time we see on both digital and analog clocks. We will use what we've learned about telling time to solve problems in real life, and by the end of our lesson, we will feel confident telling time on analog clocks all by ourselves. So, the importance of time. We use time in our daily lives. Typically, we get up at a certain time each day, we eat breakfast at a time each day, we go to school at a certain time, we have recess and lunch at a certain time, dismissal, time that we do homework, play, eat dinner, take a bath, and go to bed and start the day all over again. Activities occur at certain time in the day, and that gives our lives schedule and order. Our essential question for this lesson is, how do we figure out what time it is using a clock with hands? So first we're going to talk about the parts of an analog clock. So first you'll see the small hand here. That, boys and girls, is the hour hand. And a good way for our brains to remember that is hour is spelled with only 4 letters. It is a shorter word, just like the hand on the clock is smaller. And the big hand, representing the minute hand, well, minute is a longer word than hand, so minute is a longer hand. Just a good trick for your brain to remember. Now let's first talk about the hour hand. The hour hand on the clock, again, the shorter hand, it is represented by going around, and the numbers on the clock represent its value. So if it's on the 1, it's in 1 o'clock, okay, and then all the way till 2, then it's 2 o'clock, and all the way till 3. Now remember, it might be really, 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 really close to the 4 o'clock, but it's still in the 3 o'clock hour. So make sure that you look closely when determining that hour. And then it goes all the way up until 12 o'clock. And that's when it shifts from AM to PM. AM being the morning, all the way to 12 PM noon, and then 1 PM all the way to 12 AM, which is midnight, in the middle of the night. Now let's look at the minute hand. Boys and girls, we need to touch on our prior knowledge here, which is skip counting by 5s. And we've been practicing this a lot all year. So the way we read the minute hand is at each number, 5 minutes goes by. So for example, here we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. Notice I stopped at 60. What does that mean? If you guessed that there's 60 minutes in an hour, you would be correct. Once we get to the 60 minutes, it starts over again at the next hour. So we say up until 59 minutes, and then it's the next hour. Let's look at reading time to the nearest 5 minutes. The minute hand indicates minutes in increments of 5. So when you're looking at it, at the top, it's going to represent 0, and then 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. Now, you could count by 5s when determining the minutes. You could also remember that this is half an hour, 30, and start from 30 and count on. The more you practice, the better you'll get at remembering which number represents the minute on the clock. Okay, so now it's time to practice. What time is it? Remember, we look at the shorter hand. What does that represent? If you said hour, you are correct. And notice it's in between 7 or 8. When that happens, boys and girls, you look at the lesser hour. It's still in the 7 o'clock hour. It's not quite 8 yet. Okay? Even though the hand looks closer to 8, it's still in the 8 o'clock hour. Now what about the minute hand? Remember, the minute hand is the longer one. Well, if we're trying to figure out what it represents at the 8 here, again, we need to, that's right, skip count by 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. All right, now try and do this one on your own. Remember, this is that's right, shorter hand at the 10, and then skip count by 5s for the longer hand. What'd you get? If you got 10, 10, you'd be correct. Also, time for recess. A good one to remember. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and look at an analog clock and practice writing in the time on a digital clock. Boys and girls, we can see both represented in real life. Now in the classroom, you might commonly see this one. You also might have a digital clock at home or even on your computer screens. So here, again, we look at the hour hand, the shorter hand first, and it is pointing just before the 3. See, if I extend the hour hand here, I can see it's not quite at the 3 yet. So what does that mean? It's still in the 2 o'clock hour. So I'm going to take my pen here and I'm going to write 2 on this side of the colon. Colon is the 2 dots in between on the digital clock. Then we're going to figure out the minute. Remember, the minute hand is represented by the longer hand. And again, we're going to skip count by 5s. Here we go. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. So now we're going to go ahead and write 45 on the right side of the colon on our digital clock here. Okay, we can also identify what time it is by looking at the digital clock here and drawing the hands on our analog clock. So here it says 12:45. Now, we need to be careful not to draw the hour hand pointed directly at 12, and I'll tell you why. The only time the hour hand is directly at 12 is when it's exactly 12 o'clock, where the hour hand and the minute hand line up perfectly on the 12. Here, however, it's 12:45. Okay, let's find where that is first. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. So our hour hand, the longer hand, is going to extend here. Well, what does that mean for the minute hand? This is the minute hand. What does that mean for the hour hand? That means that it is in between the 12 and 1 and slightly closer to the 1 because it's only 5, 10, 15 minutes to the 1 o'clock hour. So it's going to be about right here on your clock. All right, let's continue on. Let's talk about some real-world applications. You might be asking yourself, but Mrs. Burnell, when am I going to use this? I have a digital clock on my computer and at my house. Well, boys and girls, remember that in our classroom, we don't have a digital clock beyond your computer. We have our analog clock, and that's what Mrs. Burnell uses to determine when we arrive, when we go to recess, when we go to lunch, and when we go home. You might often see this as well. You might have a fancy analog clock on your watch at home, and maybe you haven't been able to read it before. Or maybe you can talk your parents into buying it for you for Christmas or your birthday because it will help you remember how to read an analog clock. Or maybe you have a clock like this. They're very common on church buildings. So you can see them commonly around the world or around your daily life. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I hope you have a better understanding of how to read clocks with hands now. I can't wait to continue practicing with you.